Let's put up C1 on the screen here. This is from NBC News. As we talk about governors, yeah, there you go. So Democrat Laura Kelly wins re-election in the Kansas governor's race, NBC News projects. One thing I'd like to add to that also, just while we're talking about the sort of Kansas, there was a lot of speculation that Kevin Stitt was going to lose the governorship in Oklahoma. And this is one of the spots where polling was just, most of the bad polls were erring on the side of undercounting Democratic votes. This poll, these polls in Oklahoma were awful. They were so bad. Kevin Stitt was reelected governor of Oklahoma, a red state, very comfortable. But actually, there were several polls that had Hoffmeister, this is the last week of October, up by 3, up by 1, up by 4 throughout October. And Stitt was handily reelected, probably like it might even be a double-digit margin. At least it was when I was looking.
Yeah, 55-42 here, 56-42.
Yeah, that's with 99% in, double digits.
Well, we were making fun of those polls here.
Right, well.
But sometimes you can be like, look, come on. Get out of here with this.
You can, but Oklahoma Republicans were nervous, legitimately nervous about that. And obviously, if we put C2 up on the screen, we're just sort of taking a tour around the different governorships in the country. Gretchen Whitmer, another one where there were polls.
And they swept the legislature, too.
There you go. Another one, and they had an abortion referendum on the ballot. So the narrative, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but the narrative that it was this clear-cut sort of dichotomy between abortion and the economy. In a midterm, when you need turnout for abortion clearly helped Whitmer, and that's clearly what is not being picked up on by the pollsters. Right? That's clearly what was being missed, that these things were going to be, were going to buoy Democrats in ways that they just weren't picking up on.
And the most difficult thing for pollsters to pick up is youth turnout. Because they just have such a hard time gauging whether or not a young person who's telling them they're going to turn out is going to turn out. Partly, it's not just generational prejudice. It's that there's not as much of a history. If somebody's 50 years old, and then you can look back in their voting history and tell how many times they've come out. They're like, yeah, I'm totally going to vote. And you check their voting record, they haven't voted in 10 years. You're like, well, I'm not so sure they're going to vote.
Well, they also might pick up a landline.
Right, it's harder to reach them. And also, if they're a 20-year-old and they haven't voted before and they're telling you, I'm definitely going to vote, as a pollster, now you have to make the decision. Are they telling you the truth? Are they actually going to vote? Because you don't have a voting history that you can go back and look at. And I'll take a quick victory lap. Because if you remember Tuesday night on Megyn Kelly, she and Larry Elder were like laughing at the idea that there might be a surge in youth voter turnout, and that Democrats always bank on these young people turning out, and then the young people never show up. They showed up in 2018, and that really made the difference. And that was anti-Trump, and that was gun violence, if you remember. That was the surge of the post-Parkland movement. They doubled their share in 2018. They doubled their share of the electorate. Nobody had ever seen an explosion like that, and they're overwhelmingly Democratic. And so they came out again, we still don't exactly know in what numbers, but they came out in huge numbers. And I think there are several things that you can draw from that. One is that you got to stop thinking about people just as boxes. Yes, I think this vindicates Biden's student loan policy. I think clearly, done. Anybody who thought that was going to backfire on Democrats missed that. But that's not all students are. I think the climate bill that they passed, the IRA, the biggest climate spending in history, I think that mattered. I think that brought out some young people, got some young people enthusiastic, showed them there's a purpose in getting involved, but also, and maybe most importantly, abortion. Because for some reason, we do this thing where we think, well, you have women over here, and then you have young people over here.
None of the young people are women.
None of the or are the boyfriends of women, or young people who care, or young boys, young men who care about.
Dave Portnoy, who said he was not voting Republican.
This is
after Dobbs.
To people under 30, or 40, who have just grown up, abortion is a fundamental right in the Constitution to all of a sudden be told it's not? I think they're like, no. And so yes, certainly women of all ages are offended at having that right stripped away. But I think people under 40, men and women, I think were particularly driven by that. How are Republicans thinking through the turnout model in relation to abortion policy?
I think I'm sort of trying to pick a lot of this apart in my monologue. I do think that there was this idea, and understandably so, that the economy was in a place where people would be voting, and they would want to hear more from candidates about their sort of their bank accounts. Like, what's happening to my bank account? What is happening to my portfolio? What is happening to just my ability to feed my family and to do X, Y, and Z? And that would be sort of separate. That would be, or it would be overwhelming. Not separate,
Right.
but that those interests would overwhelm interests in talking about anything else, like nothing else. And I don't know. I mean, I think there were some voters like that probably, but you have to then factor in what that's going to do, for instance, to the youth vote, which is historically, and this is like Megan had a good point when she was talking, like historically it's low. And historically, especially in a bad economy under an unpopular incumbent president, you would not expect young people to turn out high enough in ways that would be super helpful for Democrats. And I don't think that sort of the Dobbs aftermath was factored in, and especially in states where there was an abortion referendum on the table. That, I think, in Michigan is absolutely key, completely crucial. And young voters that's not people who have kids in the schools and would be upset with Gretchen Whitmer over that, and over COVID lockdowns, which was a huge issue in the race between Whitmer and Dixon. So it wasn't picking up on what Democrats were doing. And we were very clear here that dismissing the focus on abortion was not, obviously Democrats know this is about turnout. I don't think that they handled it spectacularly well. I don't think a lot of Republicans handled it spectacularly well, but midterm elections, you're going to hear about democracy, and you're going to hear about abortion when Democrats are trying to just these marginal wins. That's what it is. I mean, there are all these kinds of things that tip the balance and make the difference, and that's one of them, obviously.
The danger for Democrats feeling so good coming out of this would be that they ignore some of the routes that they took in a lot of other places, like Iowa, for instance, parts of New York, where the abortion message worked in places like New Hampshire, places like Michigan here that have a slightly higher college-educated population. If they're going to be competitive nationally, they're going to have to reach workers to like where they are. And so one of the good signs coming out of Michigan is that Democrats are saying now that the first thing they're going to do is take on right to work. The Betsy DeVos kind of hard right Michigan wing there has pushed as many kind of pro-corporate, anti-worker policies as they could get through with their.
I mean, a lot of workers support right to work.
Well, we'll see. So that's a fun fight to have. Some workers.
It is a fun fight to have.
Yeah. Some workers are anti-union, no doubt about it.
Or at least not even anti-union, but just anti not being forced into a union.
Right. So Democrats are going to go at right to work, and we'll see how that pans out, because that's actually an interesting fault line for the populist left and right. It's where the populist right is for workers, but they're still kind of sorting through exactly where they are on unions. Yeah,
it's an interesting fight. I don't agree necessarily that it's an interesting fault line because of sort of what I was just saying, like a lot of, so American Compass, it's Orrin Cass's group that does a lot of pro-worker issues from the right perspective. They support a different sort of formation, a more European formation about what organizing should look like for American workers. And I don't imagine that they would be against right to work. And I mean, I don't know. I think it's not a great fight to pick for the left, actually, because I think it exposes a lot of the cracks in the sort of foundation and a lot of the conversations that people don't want to have about the faults in big labor. And it always, I'm just saying, from a political perspective, I don't know that it's the most expedient fight to pick.
Yeah, that I disagree with. Without without organized labor, without workers collectively demanding fights through the political process, I think you don't have a left that is anything other than kind of, culture war, reverse culture war. So if Democrats are going to fight in the workplace and appeal to workers' material interests, I think that's the best chance that the party has, because otherwise it's just a faculty lounge party. And if that becomes the debate between the right and the left, do you want the freedom to not have to join a union in your workplace, which might then dissolve your union? Because it's not as if the right to, so in states where right to work has been implemented, you see union density collapse.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it's not as if you still have the union protections, but you have the individual freedom to not join a union. Mm-hmm. You don't end up having the choice to join a union or not because you've destroyed the unions.
Yeah.
And so that's why, and I think that's why in places where right to work has been implemented, it might be easier to reverse, because it sounds nice to say to somebody like, look, we're totally for a union, but you don't have to be in it if you work for this company if you don't want to, but you can still have the benefits. So you get the extra health care, you get the pension, you get the annual raises, mm-hmm. but you also don't have to pay dues. Mm-hmm. And a lot of workers are like, I'll take that deal. Mm-hmm. Great. Mm-hmm. Gas prices are going up. I'll take an extra $100, $150 in my paycheck. And then a couple years later, the union's gone. And now you don't have a choice anymore to get that health care, to get that pension, to get that rate, to get that annual raise, because there is no union. So I think that we'll see, but I think it's a fight worth having.
That's so like Michigan as a test case in what happens, yeah. Like as a sort of example of what you lose when you pass right to work. You're saying like that only works out in the favor of Democrats. And it's interesting because I think back to the right to work fight in Michigan. What was that, like almost 10 years ago? Mm-hmm. That really did expose, when you're going out and talking to workers who are saying, I absolutely believe in right to work because I have problem X, Y, and Z with my union, that is powerful, mm-hmm. And not in the direction.
Right, and unions need a check, and there are certainly corrupt unions.
And that was before unions were super woke too, by the way.
Are they that woke in
Nationally, they definitely are. And so the national organizations that the chapters are responsive to, I guarantee you a lot of Michigan workers have problems with. But that doesn't mean that they see that as outweighing different interests.
The grass is always greener, and so we'll see.
See, that's a really interesting point. The grass is always greener, and I think you've persuaded me that this is an interesting.
All right, excellent.
An interesting fight.
There we go.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.